All right. Thank you so much, and welcome to Navigating the Transition to Low GWP Refrigerants in Canada, presented in joint with HRAI, the Carolina Czajko, and Pushpinder Rana with Mitsubishi Electric Sales Canada. We got a packed presentation, so I'm going to clear out of the way very shortly, but just a few housekeeping items off the top. If you want to participate in the presentation today, you can. We have question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. Pop your questions in there and we'll get to them when we can. Also, feel free to chat with us in the chat function as well. We'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. We had a question already, and it is, will this presentation be sent to attendees? Well, the good news is that it will both be posted on HRAI's YouTube page after the fact, and we can send out a link as well if there's interest there. But you can find it on HRAI's YouTube page pretty much immediately after the presentation is done. So feel free to share it and watch it again. Without further ado, though, I want to welcome Pushpinder and Caroline. Caroline, welcome. And
Thank
I
you.
will, hey, thank you very much. And I will pass it over to you, and I will be in the comment section, seeing if anyone has something to say.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, good morning to everyone, depending upon your location. Thank you very much for joining this another session on low GWP transition meant for Canada. It has been a pleasure working with HRAI. Caroline and I have been working together, running these seminars in different capacities in different places. We've been working with industry partners, regulatory authorities, of course, manufacturers, and different stakeholders who will get impacted by the low GWP refrigerant transition or HFC reduction plans. So this is a presentation just to update you. What do we know so far? How do we expect things will move? There are still many moving variables. We may not have all the answers yet, because we are still on the path to confirm some of the milestones, some of the deadlines, some of the timelines. So there are some moving variables, but the intention is just to update you what's going on and what's expected on this path. Any harmonization with our neighbors, and what's happening at different levels, just to update you, so that you are better prepared what to expect on this path. So with this, I would like to start my presentation. My name is Rana. I work for Mitsubishi Electric as the Director of Engineering and Services. And so today is my chance to update you on, the low GWP refrigerant transition. And Caroline will cover later on more on HRA activities and how we are engaging different people in the game, so that you're more aware of what's going on and what's to expect in the coming future. This is my first slide, more about industry buzz. A lot of marketing is happening on social media, online. Different manufacturers are promoting their own strategy. We are hearing about R32, about R454B, R454C. These all are potential R410A replacement candidates, or more to say, the potential A2L candidates. But again, this is a story promoted by every manufacturer, so there is no one thing in the game this time. Every manufacturer may try to promote their own blend or their own refrigerant for their own business reasons or strategic reasons. But these are some of the inputs we see in the market from time to time, from Daikin, from Mitsubishi, from Carrier, from Trane. Some of you may have seen this chart already, how the refrigerant is classified in terms of toxicity and flammability. This comes from ASHRAE standard 34. Today our focus is A2L, obviously, and we just mentioned some examples, R454B, R32, R454C, and few more. So this is a little bit more scientific, how the refrigerants are classified, as I said, in terms of toxicity on x-axis, but flammability on the y-axis. Sorry, can we go back to previous slide? So essentially, the key intention globally is to lower, the global warming. So as we try to lower the GWP of the refrigerant as compared to R410A, for example, which has 2088 GWP, as you try to lower the GWP of a refrigerant, the flammability increases. So there is a direct correlation between lowering the GWP and the flammability properties. So you can see here we are comparing R454B with R410A. R32 is around 675 something in terms of GWP level. And refrigerant, when we talk about flammability, you're looking at parameters like burning velocity. So if you see A2L, the burning velocity is less than 10 centimeter per second. Another key parameter is heat of combustion. So A2L refrigerants have a lower heat of combustion. It's less than 19 kilojoule per kilogram. So burning velocity is the maximum velocity at which your flame would propagate, which is given here, as I said, 10 centimeter per second. And another key parameter is lower heat of combustion, which is 19 kilojoule per kilogram. So these are the two parameters to define the flammability. Another parameter is flame angle. So it's around 90 degrees Celsius for A2L and A3. And A3 is a good example here if you talk about lowering the GWP. So refrigerant like propane with just 3 GWP could be a great candidate. But again, it has way higher flammability and it's classified as A3. So propane is a known refrigerant in some countries, especially in Europe. It's already available in the HVAC system. Again, that's just another example of a potential candidate. But today focus is A2L. Next slide, please. Key point to consideration when we transit to low GWP refrigerant. So oxygen deprivation is possible in a tight and enclosed spaces. So when we talk about these parameters, we have some nice guidelines coming from HRAI standards, from our B52, how to design a system based on new guidelines. But all in all, it's not very different from A2 refrigerant or A1 refrigerant. Your frostbite is possible, and there are additional protection requirements which should be used by the firefighters or technicians. Now, what is different? This is where the story changes. That obviously, when you talk about A2Ls and A3, you are directly dealing with flammability concerns, and
Oh,
I already
excuse me,
mentioned.
Pushpinder.
Yeah,
Do you hear that in the background?
I do. Now I hear more. I think if I may request participants to keep their mic off, it
Okay,
causes
it's gone.
some noise disturbance. It's gone
Must have
now.
been a
It's
computer thing.
better. Thank
Sorry
you
about
so
that.
much. No, that's fine. It's fine now. And what's different would be obviously the flammability concerns, as we said. So A2Ls have more flammability than A2s or A1s. A1 like R410A has no flame propagation, as we know. Um, and then burning velocity, high heat of combustion is obviously higher, but still manageable. It's less than 10 centimeter per second, and heat of combustion, as I said, less than 19 kilojoules for each kilogram. And A3 refrigerant, they have low GWP. Propane was a good example, R290, with GWP only 3, but way higher flammability because it's classified as highly flammable. But again, none of these refrigerants have toxicity concerns. Just to be careful, when we talk about A3, A2, or A2L or A1, we are in the zone of low toxicity. So toxicity is not a concern, it's always the flammability. So when you say A2L, so it's a low toxicity, but a little bit higher flammability being on the 2L side. A bit of background, it's not something happening just in last 1 to 2 years. I know a lot of attention has been gained in the recent years, but a lot of research, a lot of investment has happened on this path. Um, so there have been so many, steering committees, technical committees, AHRI, even privately funded research. subcommittees have been around to work on different aspects of A12 transition. So a lot of research, a lot of investment has gone. I think we've been working on this for last almost 10 years. It's complicated. You're not looking at only scientific research to come up with the suitable blend, either a blend or a single fluid like R32. There's a lot of work in terms of code changes, building code, mechanical code, then compliance of the product with the new regulations. So it's a long journey. It's a little bit complicated work right from the get-go. So work has been ongoing for last 10 years. Looks like we have made a good progress, and seems like we are very close to finally getting it implemented. Working in coordination with federal government, with provincial governments, also working with the code people, regulatory people, and all that. This is more from US SNAP, which is uh, significant new alternative program, in short. Uh, uh, so under SNAP, they recognized 6 refrigerant as the potential R410A replacement candidate. Now, just a piece of caution, SNAP rule is not meant for Canada. We have our own DSL, domestic substance list, which is which defines what are the acceptable candidate on this path. But this is just to give you a summary that US SNAP rule identified these 6 potential candidates in terms of low GWP transition path, or essentially replacing R410A with one of these. Uh, but the key fact is it's all defined by GWP level. As long as your refrigerant, whether it's a single fluid like R32 or a mixture like R454B or R454C, as long as you're less than given threshold, which is currently 750 GWP, you're okay. So the turning point here is, unlike in the past, there was only one refrigerant, whether R22 or R407C or R410A, one refrigerant sold or manufactured by all manufacturers. That story might change. So as long as you have one of these refrigerants and you're less than 750, which is current GWP threshold, you're okay to be in the game, which is different from what we have seen in the past. A lot of things happening at government level, international level. So this is just one of the example. We are aware of the Kigali Agreement to amendment to Montreal Protocol. We are aware of the Paris Accord, where ambitious targets have been set. I think globally the plan is to cut HFC reduction by 80% in the next 30 years, which is a collective responsibility of all countries. Part of that agreement, the intention is to avoid up to, I think, around 80 billion metric tons of CO2 equivalent emission, and to avoid up to ½ degree Celsius of global warming. So under this agreement, each country has its own reduction target timeline. This is for Canada. You can see a very ambitious target, and that will cut down to how different activities will be undertaken in terms of heat pumps or chillers or refrigeration equipment and all that. So this is just to give you an example of that Canada is seriously following the phase down schedule for given year. There's a metrics which shows you 2019 to 2040 something, and everything follows all these big targets. Now, this is just a quick view of Schedule 1.1. Uh, Maybe some of you might be aware of EPA's implementation of AIM Act. They seems to have more clarity on timeline set for different format. Looks like they have a defined timeline for rack and pack, for VRF system, for chillers. It's a big schedule. Contrary to US their EPA guidelines, we follow Schedule 1.1 under ODESHAR, and as we checked, our guidelines are limited to what you see on the screen. So only chillers are defined, that as of 1st January 2025, any chiller which is imported in Canada should have GWP less than 750. Rest of all items are more refrigeration systems, as you can see. Now, this is from schedule is publicly available. Anybody can go and check. It's on the website. It's online, easily available. Just in case anybody has desired to dive deeper into, what kind of timelines and GWP levels have been set for different product format. It's all available online. We can share the link as well. But essentially, it's Schedule 1.1. If you see the list, most of equipment mentioned here are refrigeration system, commercial and industrial. The only direct system from the HVAC, or I would say for the comfort heating and cooling, would be the chiller. So that's the only known product type still mentioned in Schedule 1.1. We don't see any heat pumps. We don't see any VRF systems being mentioned in Schedule 1.1, which seems to be a gap or ambiguity on our side if we compare with EPA's plan. A quick view of how the implementation is progressing in the US. So I think almost 25 states have the building code which is signed into the law. A year or 2 years ago, the map was different, but now it's picking up pace. So almost they're very close to getting it done for the whole US. So step by step, some states have a different plan or they are at a different level, but looks like most of the US is kind of their building codes have been signed into the law to adopt the A2L transition plan or low GWP transition plan. So this is updated as of I think July 23rd. It says, yeah, but this is something we got recently from the US. And this is the latest status of current adoption in the US. So I think some of these points I already touched. If we follow, I mean, traditionally we've been, with US in all these transition, activities. So the anticipation is most likely we will follow, even though we don't have all the defined timelines yet into our schedules, whether it's DSL or ODSHR or Schedule 1.1 I recently mentioned. But some of the challenges, some of the issues we are still facing, that if we look at their timeline, which is January 2025 and 26, we need more clarity from the federal side. So different entities are involved. There's a lot of work going on with CSAB 52. Most of you should be aware that the 13th edition, which is a draft edition, was recently released for public review. I sit as chair on B52, so the team has worked very hard, and this was one of the key milestones to work on A2L transition or lowering GWP plans. So I think the deadline is like 5th of August. The CSAB 52 is a major need because it defines all the criterias, the calculations, A2L for human comfort. The refrigerant tables have been updated. The logics have been defined, ventilation strategies, mitigation strategies, the way things should be sensed, the response mechanism, the new formulas to calculate the maximum refrigerant charge. So there's a lot of information which is CSAB 52 draws heavily from ASHRAE standard 15 and 34, by the way, and also the updated UL standard. So it's a key document and it will play a huge role in terms of transitioning to low GWP refrigerant in Canada. So again, as I said, yeah, sure, Matt.
Sure. We just had a question from the audience, if you have a moment. From Nicholas, do we know whether the ECCC will continue to set more GWP limits for other products in the future? Do individual provinces and cities have plans or the authority to do so?
So Matt, I think Caroline might also help. ECC will set a high level guideline. We expect they would say, just follow what EPA has set. We expect EPA to reduce GWP limit from 750 to 700, which is expected in October, which is already a huge change from their side. We've been talking to ECCC from time to time. We brought these gaps and delays to their attention. Even recently, I got some updates from ECCC. There's a lot of work to be done on the ECCC side as well. There's no doubt, but looks like they are counting on provincial government to adopt B52 into their building code, which is a key requirement. So ECCC would do their part in terms of setting up guidelines at the high level, but a bigger challenge or requirement is how quickly the provincial building code will adopt CSAB 52 13th edition, which in my opinion should be officially released by the year end. So it's ECCC doing their part, but also the local housing ministries or provincial building code quickly adopting B52. These two things should happen, in parallel, and they both are critical. So just to add, we've been releasing letters. Again, HRAI has done a wonderful job. We have released letters to provincial, building officials, just making sure that they are aware of all these key changes coming on their way. They are proactively looking into it. They are ready to quickly adopt. The biggest danger is ECCC, even if they release any guidelines, if B52 is delayed to get adopted into our provincial building code, the gap will just increase. And when I say that, we have maybe 1 year or 2 year maximum if we follow US timeline to bring A12s into our building space. So the bigger need, even before ECCC, is how quickly our building officials can adopt B52 code, which in my opinion should be released by year end or by coming January. And then how quickly people can understand, learn, and adopt into their routine life will determine how smooth this transition will be. But it's still a working piece of work, and we are working on it to make sure people are aware of the need. I hope that answered the question. Otherwise, we can always talk offline as well, just to make sure that you know what's going on from our side. But we are working diligently with provincial authorities, bringing all these matters to their attention via letters, campaign, and all. It's important that they know what's going on and they quickly can understand the need and adopt. What does success look like? It's a good question. So the biggest need of the hour is the harmonization of Canada and the US on this path. We understand that if there is a lack in this harmonization and US goes ahead with their timeline and Canada is still on a wait and watch policy, that will create some disruption. It may create shortage of product. So a big need is, and US is far bigger market. We follow their standard, as you know, whether it's HRAI or UL. So we bring a lot of stuff from what they have done on their side and try to reflect on our side. So in our personal opinion, that harmonization is a key step. And as I just mentioned, the early adoption of B52 mechanical code. The code is a U-turn. Let me put it in straight words. The new B52 code, which is the 13th edition, is absolutely a U-turn for everyone, whether you are a consulting engineer or you're a manufacturer or you're a wholesaler or you're a design engineer. The precise understanding of new B50 code is the key to succeed with A12 products in Canada. So this is the foundation. It's equally important that people do their part. They do the public review so that they can understand the new content. A lot of criteria are changed. A lot of refrigerant tables have been updated. There are new calculation, new logics, new guidelines, new ventilation strategies. It's a lot of work, and time may not be enough. So we want everybody to be aware of what's going on and how different entities have to play their part. Key concepts, as I said, new UL standard, which is also reflected in B52 code. They are talking about refrigerant limit charge, ventilation strategies, detection strategies, the response strategies. They are talking about what should be the duct heater temperature. You cannot put a duct heater, let's say, more than I think it's 700 Celsius or something. I don't remember the exact value. So there are precise guidelines being mapped out. There are some algorithms, there are flowcharts added to B52. It gives you a really good view of what to expect in terms of A2L, also for human comfort and also for commercial or industrial application. So there are a lot of new contents added to B52, and a lot has come from ASHRAE standard 15 and 34, which were released just last year. Very briefly, I mentioned so yeah, this is ASHRAE standard 2022 version, which was released, I believe, around May last year. So these standards, so we draw heavily from standard 15 and 34. 15 is more about safety practices, installation standard. You're talking about manufacturer provided sensors and response mechanism built into the system. So there are certain field practices, but then there are also manufacturer provided additional accessories like shut-off valve on the gas and liquid line, or refrigerant leakage sensor built into the system. So a lot of these things are coming from the UL standard, which are also reflected into our B52. 15-2 is a new standard relatively dedicated to residential application. So these standards are heavily referred in our B52 as well. The next page talks about standard 34, again 2022 version. It has almost 31 addenda, updated refrigerant tables. You're talking about LFL, you're talking about RCLs. So a lot of changes have, I think a lot of work has gone into updating these standards, which is so obvious. And then we drew a lot of, a lot of content was taken from these updated ASHRAE standards 15 and 34, as I mentioned. This is a very quick mentioning of our current standard CSAB 52, 12th edition. So a brief message here is, unless our new standard mechanical code B52 13th edition is formally implemented, our 12th edition is still valid. So it has certain restrictions. For example, you cannot take any A2L into any institutional application. There are certain restrictions, if you have a monoblock system, what kind of mechanical room you have to use, or the machinery room you have to use, and the refrigerant limit as per the occupancy type, whether it's the institutional or it's the public assembly or it's a residential. So whatever B52 has now is still completely valid. I know it's going to change. Your new B52 provides additional guideline how to bring A2L into institutional application, which is absolutely zero as of today. But this is all going to change. But until that change is happening, our 12th edition is still valid. And I was told that there are still some provinces, they are still working on 11th edition of B52, not even 12th, but 11th. I think with 13th edition in place, a lot of provinces would have no choice but to adopt 13th version directly. So they would be skipping, some of provinces will be skipping 12th edition because they're still staying on maybe 11th edition, but moving forward, 13th edition is the only way if you want to handle A2L, into your lives. Building code is a big requirement. So our building code, national building code, or provincial building code, they all need to be changed, updated with new guidelines. We don't have any direct mentioning of how to handle A2Ls or A3 refrigerant in our building code, which is another big piece of work. Excuse me. So we are bringing these gaps, these voids to their attention as well. So it's one of the work in progress, making sure that our building code, whether national level or at a provincial level, they are updated in time to bring B52, this is just a brief view of what to expect. This is coming from the draft version of B52, which is again available for public review. You can see here, there are so many new calculation. The EDVC calculation logic has LFL. You're not talking about RCL anymore, which was a prime criteria currently for refrigerant concentration limit. It is being replaced by LFL, which is lower flammability limit, and each refrigerant type has a different LFL. I just mentioned very briefly, R32 is 19.1, 454B is 18.5. For institution, Currently, you cannot take any A2L, but now we have a new criteria where you can take A2L into institutional application like hospitals, old age care homes, senior living, jails, prisons, police station, anything which falls in that category. So a lot of changes are coming, with B52. Again, coming from ASHRAE standards, obviously. There are new formulas or logics on ventilation strategies, leakage detection mechanism, the response timing. There are new refrigerant table, and as a manufacturer, what is coming pre-installed from the factory, and what are the add-ons you have to do in the field if you're handling with A2L refrigerant, if you're handling A2L refrigerant after certain quantities. So the best place would be to go through the draft code to give you a good sense of what's coming. Similarly, there will be additional consideration. Now, some are with current A1 refrigerant like R410A, some may be optional or not required, but moving forward, these will be mandatory from the code side, whether it's vacuuming or airtight test or brazing. Some of these practices which were optional, or these were more pushed by the manufacturer in terms of their own guideline. But moving forward, many of these practices will become mandatory or required for the given reasons, again, because of flammability concerns with A2L. A very quick view of what kind of cylinders we're going to deal with. So A2L cylinder will have a left-hand thread, and there will be a red strip around the cylinder so that you can easily recognize A2L cylinder. Now, when I say A1 and A2L, A1 refrigerant will still be available to service existing equipment because we've been living with R410A for the last 20 years or even more. But so we'll still be dealing with A1 refrigerant for any servicing or any maintenance and all that. But then this is more to show you how these refrigerant cylinders will be different so that you can easily recognize, more related to contractor community. But again, you'll be carrying more than one A2L in your service vans, depending on what you're going to deal with, R32, 454B, or 454C, which is one of the concerns on this path. I think I will happily ask Caroline to take over. She's going to cover the HRAI side, some of the great actions they've been taking from time to time, and they're playing a huge role on this path. So thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the session.
Thank you, Pushpinder, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I'll start by giving a summary of some of the actions that HRAI has taken to date on this transition file. We have had many A2L code working groups, one dealing with storage, handling, and also transportation. And we worked collaboratively with HRAI, as their team has been a great resource, sharing resources of members on both sides of the border. So it's been extremely helpful. We will be, in a week from now, starting up an equipment shipping group. Understand there are a couple of manufacturers in the US applying for some special permits in order to ship larger equipment containing A2Ls. So we want to coordinate our efforts there, and we're beginning to open up dialogue with Transport Canada. We also just submitted a request from one of our working groups to Transport Canada for an exemption on gross mass exemption on the class 2-1 for flammable gases as it pertains to cylinders. So we're also starting on that file now. We did a survey with our wholesaler members to check in to ensure whether we would need any additional requests made for storage as to that. So we did create a brochure and hosted a webinar, I guess about a month ago, with Andrew Klein and working again with the HRAI team. HRAI was able to launch an A2L safe handling awareness training program. This is an online program, takes anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to complete at your leisure. We have initially started a soft launch with the wholesalers that have offered it to some of their customers. So recently we did write to all of the provincial code officials expressing the urgency for them to start looking at the B52 code, be aware it's out for comment, and expressing the urgency that this be adopted, especially given the EPA proposed regulation that's coming out in October that will put some restrictions for manufacturers on what they can manufacture or export to Canada or around the world. Next. So to help our staff team lead the efforts on this harmonization strategy, we have recently relaunched our refrigeration product section. And here's just a listing of some of our key members that have joined this team. And this is led by Ryan Guerra with Copeland. And we also have the chair of our manufacturers division, Dermot McMorrow, active on this file as well. So looking at our strategy, we have a bit of a three-part action plan. We're working closely, of course, as Pushpinder mentioned, with Environment Canada and climate change, provincial building code officials, and also provincial ministers of housing. So looking at the regulatory landscape in the US, so as we understand it, EPA approves refrigerants before they are used, and they restrict specific HFCs or set global warming potential limits for specific products. So in Canada, with ODSHAR, which is the ozone depleting substance halocarbon regulation, that was the list that we had brought up earlier, which is the phase down schedule for Environment Canada and climate change. I think it's schedule 1.1. What that does is it restricts the manufacture and import of products containing HFCs, of what they are permitted unless they are restricted. So in other words, if you don't see a product listed there or a limit, for example, for DX equipment or AC or heat pumps, there's nothing there at the moment on that schedule. Environment Canada and climate change has indicated to us recently they don't have any immediate plans to add that to the schedule. But however, I would strongly advise the members so ECC does not provide legal advice on how specific regulations may apply to circumstances. So members may wish to seek their own legal interpretation, asking specific questions. There is a link here to Environment and Climate Change Canada's policy on providing guidance on regulatory requirements. So in other words, if you don't see anything controlled or restricted on that list, then you should look into it, and you may be able to ship it. Whether it can be installed or not is another question, as we see here with the building code regulations can interfere with the adoption. So it's I was discussing recently with Environment and Climate Change Canada, it's difficult to try and summarize the regulations down to a few points because they are very complex and touch on many different substances and products. So some may be thinking, well, we need to encourage Environment Canada to list, that Schedule 1.1 was not meant to handle, every piece of equipment. That wasn't the intention. So they're only putting tightening specific controls. So if it's not on the list, as they had portrayed to us, then you should investigate whether perhaps it can ship to Canada. So we are working through further discussions with Environment ECC on that subject right now. So we do have a new governance model, which was introduced in November of last year. So they've set out wanted to harmonize the construction codes in Canada. So they have created a new decision-making body, the Canadian Board for Harmonized Construction Codes. And there is an advisory council that is set up. HRAI does have a representative on that council. And there's also a codes community and various technical committees. So some of our, we see with there's a model code, it has to come into law, and then the provinces must enact legislation to adopt it. So the next model code is set for 2025. We have recently provided comments to ensure that they do reference the new 13th edition of B52, plus the fire code is built in there as well, and we've made some suggested comments on compressed gas under the fire code. So looking at what are some of our key issues. So despite this new governance model, given the fact that the National Building Code is to come out in 2025, our alignment may be off. So we really need to put on the gas and lobby and advocate, which we have already started with the provincial building officials, given the timeline of January 1, 2025 in the US and the provisions that the EPA is considering to put in place. And then some of our provinces, then they either sometimes will adopt the code in whole, or they might implement slight variations. For example, we've seen that happen in Alberta, British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec. So we will be making a presentation to this new harmonized construction code body coming weeks, and looking for support from the deputy ministers table. And we'll do a second letter writing campaign to the building code officials and also the associations that they belong to across Canada. And we will be looking to all of our members to help us in that letter writing campaign. So there's also the ministers of housing in various provinces. So they have jurisdictional authority over the building codes, and we will be reaching out to them to learn more about any potential ministerial directives to the regulators or code officials that they can help in advance, if a province, has not adopted, a new 2025 version of the code with B52 13th edition, then perhaps we can put a measure in place even before that happens to hopefully be in sync with this 2025 date. So these are some of the options. Maybe that might be a little bit similar to some of the approach that AHRI had taken in the US, trying to look at some legislative action. And again, I think we're gonna start focusing mainly on BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec at the moment, and mention the letter writing.
There are two questions in the chat. Would you like to save them for after the fact, or?
No, now it's fine.
Okay. First one from Shiva. Do we have any phase-out timelines for R410A and R134A refrigerant availability in the market? She understands we can't have new equipment based on these refrigerants after January 1st, 2025, but it's unclear if there will be future mandates to convert existing equipment to low GWP offerings, potentially due to unavailability of refrigerants.
And no, there's nothing set out in a retrofit situation. As I understand it, an A2L cannot be used, only in new refrigerants. So it will be, I realize some of that refrigerant might be in short supply eventually. And then as the targets get pushed back under what they call the P2 plan for Environment Canada, because manufacturers have to have permits as to what can be the amount of refrigerant that they can bring into Canada, and eventually that will also start to be ratcheted down. So
thank you.
Okay.
Our friend Victor Hyman is in the audience today. He asks, what happens if we get to January 1st, 2025, and these updates have not been adopted into code in Canada? Will we still be able to access R410A equipment? Will we be able to access or install A2L equipment? Or do we risk being unable to install R410A equipment that hasn't been landed before January 1st, 2025?
Coming from the US, that may, if this goes through with what the EPA is suggesting on their regulation, we may not be able to have product shipped from the US if they're not allowed to manufacture or export products. Only those that have A2Ls, then we will, there will be a hardship of receiving equipment from the US, but we could also have products arrive from other parts of the country.
Those are the questions
the
for now.
world. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
And that is why we are diligently working to ensure that we get these building codes recognized, and kudos to the CSA B52 committee. As Pushpinder said, he's chairing that group. I believe they're meeting in September in Halifax, and they'll have a lot of work ahead of them. I don't know that I have heard that not too many comments are flowing in at this point for B52, because everyone is just anxious that this will proceed. There's been a lot of work gone on with HRAI standards and UL standards, of course. So I think that everything is pretty well in order. We have training for contractors. So yeah. And I think that is about it. If anyone has any other questions for Pushpinder or myself.
Thank you very much, Caroline. As people are asking that, I just want to thank you both for putting on this webinar, and to invite anyone who's listening. We put these on all throughout the year, and if you'd like to discuss maybe putting on a webinar on a thought leadership topic of your choice, you can reach out to us. My email is mbradford, mbradford at hrai.ca. And we have some slots to fill this summer. If you'd like to be one of these fine people up on the screen sharing your knowledge, please do so. And you can also find upcoming HRAI webinars that have been planned for August, and I think we're moving to September at hrai.ca/events. But we will leave it open for a few more questions. You have your contact information on the screen if people want to reach out. And this presentation, is it posted anywhere, or will we be able to access it? We can send it after the fact. What do you think?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, okay.
And Pushpinder, maybe, I don't know if you have anything I should have also referred to you because I'm sure you know better about the supply of refrigerant. Maybe I should let you chime in on that question. Oh, I think you're on mute.
He's faded into the background.
Oh.
Just getting his headphone on again. We have about 5 minutes left, so if you do have
Putting
questions,
my
please. Oh,
headphones. I thought my mic is working, but no, I still
Sorry.
need my. So yeah, Caroline, I think just for the general audience, that I work for Mitsubishi, so we are the manufacturer. I understand, if we look at the total supply chain, you have contractors, you have wholesaler, and we are the manufacturer. So we do have equal concerns. We have to move our entire product range from R410A to whatever A2L we will adopt, and then it has to comply with all the safety and performance standards and all that. But I think there's a bit of guesswork here. We are counting on the fact that will most likely comply with what US is doing, their transition path. If I look at the schedule 1.1, which doesn't define any heat pump or any VRF system, just for an example, into their schedule, it may have two outcomes. These are not under regulation, so we can continue to import in Canada without any restrictions. But if only chillers are mentioned in their schedule, then that might be under the radar to follow the restrictions. So that is one potential outcome if we don't have guidelines in black and white from whether ECCC or ODSHR schedules get updated. On the other side, then it's up to the manufacturer if it's still in their interest to manufacture two different product lines, one for Canada and one for the A2L for the US, because US seems to be way more strict. Or it might be, an open market. You have R410A, you have A2L, you just can sell both maybe, unless things are defined in black and white by the regulatory people. So one of these three outcomes can happen. You might be able to sell both, but then manufacturer will find it very difficult economically to continue producing two product lines. So even if you don't have clear guideline, and assuming that your building codes, your national building code or provincial building code have adopted new B52 in time, I'm of the opinion then A2L transition will be easier. Even though you may not have, if we don't have, black and white instructions from ECCC, in my opinion, as long as B52 is adopted in time, that gives us the room to bring A2Ls in Canada for given formats.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're close to time, so thank you both again. This will be available, and like Caroline mentioned, we will send an email out this week with the presentation and a link to the online video as well. But until next time, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and we will see you again.
Likewise. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.